Welcome to the final topic in the Blended Online Learning Design BOLD initiative. In this video, we will take a closer look at how to flow between synchronous and asynchronous activities. For that, we have two recommendations for you to consider. One is focus on quality over quantity for the precious synchronous together time you have with your students. Two, be intentional with how you connect and cycle through asynchronous and synchronous activities. For the first recommendation, it's all about quality over quantity. Chances are, as you transition from the physical on-ground classroom to the blended online space, you're going to have a lot less synchronous live together time with your students than you're used to. So you won't be able to do everything that you're used to doing in the classroom during that Zoom or Google Meet session. So you really need to rethink the synchronous time and ask yourself, what absolutely must happen when you are live together with your students in those virtual class sessions. And there are certain things that don't translate very well to more of an asynchronous student-paced approach. And in that case, these things you really want to prioritize to use that precious live together synchronous time for. Things such as building community, checking in with your students, telling jokes, those kinds of things. You also want to prioritize making time for deepening discussions, using breakout rooms, allowing students to meet in pairs or in smaller groups and discuss. You also want to use that time for any live debates or role plays or performances that you have in mind. Pretty much everything else can be done asynchronously. Instead of giving a live lecture, you can record it and make it available for your students to watch and to review whenever they'd like. You can give them all sorts of quizzes and tests that they can do on their own time, and they can also work on other projects and assessments asynchronously as well. You could also have students engage in online discussions in a self-paced way, whether that's in a discussion forum, written, or in a video discussion using a tool such as Flipgrid. Of course, there are certain activities that could use a little bit of both asynchronous and synchronous time. For instance, you might have students start working during live class time on a collaborative group project and then ask them to complete working on the project outside of class in the asynchronous student-paced way. You might have students start working on a mini lesson presentation for homework, but then give them some class time to actually do live presentations for each other during a virtual class meeting. The idea here is to maximize what is possible during that precious live together time. And so it's important for you to pause and to think about that and to think about what really is absolutely essential to include in that. And anything that isn't essential, make sure that you're doing it outside of that live class time in an asynchronous student-paced way. The second recommendation is also about being intentional. And this time it's about being intentional with how you connect the synchronous and asynchronous activities together and how you cycle through them. There are so many different models out there that you might consider. There isn't just one way to go about this. As you can see, there's a flipped model where you start off with asynchronous time. Students are in an on-demand, self-paced way looking at videos. They're engaging in interactive activities. They're reading. They're working through a problem set. They're taking a quiz. And then after they've done that, you then meet as a class synchronously to then explore more complex topics and ideas. You might share the most challenging problems from the problem set and have students discuss how to overcome those challenges. You might have students, give them time to work together and to build understanding of different topics together. So that's more or less the straight up flipped model that many of you may already be familiar with. And then there's some other variations. So there's a guided model, which is a mixture of both asynchronous and synchronous approaches. You start off with an asynchronous approach where you give students a project or a sequence of activities or problem sets or lab work to work on, and they may be working independently or in small groups. And then you as the teacher have these little synchronous pop-ins where you check in either one-on-one with students or with the groups that are working together, and you see how they're doing, you find out if they have any questions, you give them feedback, and then you move on to the next student or to the next group. So that's more of a guided approach where their students are primarily self-paced, and then you pop in as a guide to check in on them, to make sure that everyone's doing all right. Then there's the integrated approach, which starts and ends with some synchronous time and then has asynchronous student-paced time in the middle. So you might launch the live class time with a demo or a discussion and instructions on how to make the most of the asynchronous time and make your goals and objectives clear to students. And then you sign off and you give them asynchronous time to then work on the project, work on a presentation, work on the lab, and then you regroup at the end and bring everyone back together, and you facilitate a student share out. You might give the whole class some general feedback, and then you might close out with a review of some of the key ideas and takeaways from the day. Another model to consider is more of an independent model where the time is primarily asynchronous. So students are working as individuals or in groups on a project or on a sequence of activities and assignments that you have designed for them. And then students can opt in to a tutorial or office hour session with you if they need to. If they don't need it and they're making steady progress on their own, they can just keep working independently on their own. The benefit here is they know that if they do get stuck along the way, that they can have access to you in a synchronous way to ask questions and get some feedback and coaching. And then there's the project-based learning model of flowing through asynchronous and synchronous activities. In this case, you start off with asynchronous, where students are engaging with a real-world problem or challenge or issue, and then working independently, either on their own or in groups, on exploring that issue and creating an authentic end result that they'll share with an audience. In this case, you would also plan for synchronous time where you bring students together and have them debrief their progress with the whole class. They can then also give each other peer feedback. You can give them additional coaching and feedback, and then you can make plans for what the next steps are in that achieving the goals in the project-based learning at hand. As you can see, there are many different models. There is no one-size-fits-all flow for asynchronous and synchronous activities and how to connect and cycle through them. It really depends on you, what your goals are for your students. It also depends on your students and how ready they are to be really independent learners. And so if they are ready to be independent learners, you might include more asynchronous activities. Or if they need more support from you as their teacher, you may plan for more synchronous and guided time with your students. So keep in mind, you don't have to pick one of these models and stick with it. You really can try out all of these different models and see what works well for you and your students and the various lessons that you are designing for them. As we wrap up the Bold series, this is an important moment to revisit briefly the analogy that we kicked off the series with, which is the Bold Smoothie. At this point, having watched all 10 of the videos, we hope that you are feeling more comfortable and confident with the idea of flexibly making a bold smoothie using certain base ingredients such as your digital classroom, Seesaw or Google Classroom, along with virtual class meetings using Google Meet or Zoom. And we also hope that you are feeling like you can improvise a little bit more and think about other ingredients that you might toss in that blender to meet the different goals that you have for students, whether it's online discussions, online collaborations, various projects and assessments, regular feedback loops, you name it. And we also hope that you might also feel more comfortable with the idea of thinking intentionally about how you're going to make use of asynchronous and synchronous time with your students. We have created a useful tool to make available to you to reflect and self-assess on where you're at on your Bold teacher development journey. As you can see here, it's in the format of other checklists and rubrics that we've referenced in previous themes in this series. And we'd like you to think about where you're at on your journey. Where are you a beginner? Where are you an intermediate? And where are you advanced? And what might your goals be for taking the next step and for leveling up in how you can make the most of a blended online learning design experience and approach with your students. As usual, we have lots of curated and ever expanding resources available for you in quick links. And we also want to hear from you. So if you or someone you know at Lester B Schools have examples about how you approach blended online learning design and how you approach flowing between asynchronous and synchronous activities, please do share those examples with us so that we can include them in the quick links and really cultivate a culture of cross-pollination and idea and best practice sharing amongst all Lester B schools. Many heartfelt thanks for tuning into this and other videos in this series. I really do hope that you visit the entire series and that this helps you in being a growth-minded teacher and in making the most of teaching practices both in the physical on-ground classroom as well as the blended online learning environment. Thank you once again, and I wish you all the best.